Okay, our study this week is Why Has God Abandoned Me? Um, have you ever felt that way? We're going to talk about that. Okay, so our study this week is Why Has God Abandoned Me? I have a very close friend right now who's experiencing that. Um, his wife is having some major medical problems and it's just tearing him apart. And his whole family, and it's very difficult for him. And there are times when he feels that God has abandoned him. Um, I've never experienced the kind of pain he's going through right now, but I have had times in my life where I felt God is far away. And I think many people have. And the question is, in those situations, is God really abandoning us, or what's really going on there? So what I wanted to do is just go through some examples um, and talk about what's really happening, and to discuss the question: is there something that we're doing wrong, um, that we feel like God has abandoned us, and is it wrong to feel that way? And how should we respond? And is there right ways to respond? Is there wrong ways to respond? So as we go through these, I want you to kind of keep in mind and kind of watch. God's timetable and plan may be different than ours, or He may be testing us, or some things may happen not the way we expect them to, or the thing may happen that we want, but it may happen like many, many years in the future, or it may never happen in our lifetime. And so it just kind of watch as we go through these examples to see if you can see the connection there. The first example I want to go through is Job. So you may be familiar with the story of Job. Job lived, we don't know exactly when he lived, but he lived shortly after the creation of the world. And Job was said to be an upright man, understanding his relationship with God, very humble, um, righteous, obeying God's precepts. But Satan went to him and said, Satan went to God and said, he's only following you because his life is good. And so Satan says, if I took away some of the things that have made his life good, he would turn against you. And he asked God permission to uh, tempt or torment Job to see how he responds. And God allows that to happen. At first, Satan just inflicts some disease on Job. The body is covered with sores, very uncomfortable. Job stands strong. Um, then some of his servants are killed. Eventually, all the way to his wife and children. And he has nobody but himself, and he's living in um, conditions which are very uncomfortable and painful. And a lot of people think that Job was a saint during all this, and he was up to a point, but then he did kind of turn against God and said some things that maybe you've never heard before. He talked about being abandoned by God. He says, I go in every direction, north, south, east, and west, and I can't find you. You know where I am, and you've had these things happen to me, but I can't find you. So there was a little bit of an attitude in Job's voice. And all of his quote unquote friends were kind of laying on thick and telling him he had done all these things wrong when he hadn't, and saying he was deserving the punishment he was receiving. Eventually, God reconciled with Job. Job reconciles with God. God shows him where his place is, um, where he's gone wrong, and blesses Job and returns to him all the things that were taken away. But there are several. If you go to Job 23 and just read through that, you'll see how terrified and how abandoned Job felt. If you go to Psalm 35, you'll see some passages there that David has written, and he's being persecuted. We don't know exactly what. We think it may be the persecution he experienced from Saul. He says, "Oh Lord, how long are you going to watch this? Rescue me from these destructive attacks." And this went on for 7 years. And so David was on the run. On the run, he had already been anointed by Samuel to be the new king of Israel. But Saul was going to try to make sure that David was killed. And so David's probably wondering, are you on my side or not? Where are you? Why have you abandoned me? Eventually, David is rescued and does become the king of Israel and is considered the greatest king ever of Israel. And God referred to him as a man after my own heart, and the Messiah lineage goes through David. And now it's interesting, in both of these situations, Job and David go right at God and say, "Where are you? What have you done to me?" So if you ever feel that way, it's not wrong to tell that to God. "God, why have you abandoned me?" It's not wrong to say that. God wants you to come to him at these times. Maybe the lesson you'll learn is humility, but it's not wrong to express your feelings to him. If you switch gears and look at Abraham and Sarah, God had promised that through them, all the nations in the world will be blessed. But they didn't have any children. So how can that happen through them? And Abraham even asked him that. How's that going to happen? I don't have any children. And this promise was made when Abraham was 75 years old. And their first child happened when Abraham was 100. I'm sure during that 24, 25-year period, we know Abraham and Sarah felt God had abandoned them and really weren't trusting that God was going to fulfill his promise, although he eventually did do that. If you look at Genesis 35, you got the story of Joseph, and God told Joseph through a dream that he would be a great ruler someday, and that, in fact, all of his brothers and even his father would come and live under him in Egypt. And the next thing that happens, he's being sold into slavery by his brothers, being abandoned by his brothers. For 15 years, he was waiting for God to fulfill his promise. And eventually God did bring his brothers and his father to him. And they were reconciled. And Joseph even forgave his brothers for all that they had done to him and said, what you did as bad, God has turned into good. A lot of people look at Joseph as almost like a Christ type, meaning that he foreshadowed the things that Christ would do. And speaking of Jesus, on the cross, what did he say? My God, why have you forsaken me? It was a fulfillment of a prophecy from Psalm 22, but it's also most likely was expressing some of the abandonment that Jesus felt on the cross. We know that God didn't abandon Jesus, that he raised him from the dead, but Jesus, death on the cross was part of this plan of salvation for all of us. And Jesus, in his human state, didn't fully understand completely what was going on, and at times on that cross felt abandoned by God. So there's nothing wrong with you if you feel abandoned by God. There are times when you go through rough patches in life where our emotions can take over and we feel, where is he? Why has he left me? When you feel like he's not there, that doesn't mean he's not there. And it's not wrong to tell God these things either. He already knows how you feel. It might as well just say it out loud and have a conversation with him. So I'm sorry if you're going through this right now, if you do feel abandoned, and I just want to reassure you, that you have your faith and trust in God, that he will never abandon you. Love you all. See you next week.